Alright, now I will show how to do nesting through Maestro files. This is an example of a nest that I've already made. So you want to go up here to projects and hit nesting. I don't care to save this, so it'll bring you to this. Now, the way that I know how to do this, there's kind of a lot of steps that are skipped because Brian actually pre-programmed a lot of these things. But first of all, you have your spoil board thickness. And I'm just for now going to show the things that I directly worry about when I'm making these. So you want to put in your spoil board thickness, whatever it may be. It's 0.762. And down here to next. Here you're going to be talking about your sheet size. Obviously your length, width. Set this thickness to whatever the thickness of all your parts that you're going to be making is. So ours was 0.73, we'll make it that. This here is how many sheets that you are able to use for this. Now I typically will just put in some large number so that it'll just show me how many sheets I'll need in total. Vertex, low left, that's just starting, your 0 point where the axes are. And this shows how much space you want to have between all of these, the left, the right. And I typically leave this at 1/8. This is basically the same thing as when you're loading a program in Maestro Active, and you do your X and Y offsets. But this just means that the parts that are being nested will be no closer to the edge. Their edge will be no closer to the edge of the sheet than this. So you want to do that. And as far as I know, the material, it doesn't really matter. Now I hit next again. Go back. Hit next. So now here's where you will actually load the parts. So, well, I'm actually going to go back because I know that some parts that I was loading were 0.461 in thickness. So I'm just going to put that in for the sake of example. So you want to go down here and click Programs. And you can either individually just check parts that you made. These were drawer box parts that I made. Well, actually, these are individual nests. Let me go to bed 2A and into my maple drawer parts folder. So you can select any of these, or you can select and hold the shift key and click the bottom one, and it will highlight all of those parts. So clicking the shift key, I'm hitting the bottom file, and now they're all in there. And then you can just hit open, and it will bring them all in. And then obviously if you want more parts from a different file folder, you just go in and navigate to the folder you want and do the same process. Now see, these I actually have at 0.5 thickness, and it's not going to like that because my sheet was 0.461. So I'm going to make all of these 0.461. Now these were maple, so they have a grain to them. And so I don't want to do this, but if I was using, say, melamine, where it didn't matter the grain direction, I could hit this rotate checkbox, and that would allow the piece to rotate any way that it needs to take up space most efficiently. But most of the time we'll be working with things with a grain, and when you're programming in Maestro CNC, the grain is typically kept as the X direction. So whatever your long side that you want grain to be along is, you'll make that the X direction. So now that this is done, this is what I was talking about, where you can kind of just I'm clicking next a bunch of times right now, and I'm going through all of these different menus, and I've always gotten by without having to edit any of this. Here we are back at our actual parts list. Going. Here you can change your work area like we saw in Maestro Active. You'll remember that it came up as HG, but EH will use the entire, basically the entire vacuum table. You can also access the settings such as changing from vacuum devices to a different type of locking. I unfortunately had to turn the dust collector back on. So that's what that noise was. But then you just click next until it's grayed out, and then you can hit end. And it will tell you here, oh, this reminds me. Let's do all that again. Go back up to nesting. And what's nice is that if you have to redo a nest, if you do it again within your same nest file, it will retain everything. So as you can see, our spoil board thickness is still there. The sheet changes we made are still there. And I just want to demonstrate that you can do several quantities. So I want 10 of this part, I want 2 of this part, and let's say 20 of this one. Next, 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 end. It shows that it's successfully nested all of the parts that I wanted. So we can hit close. And now my nesting file shows up. Here's the first sheet. But if we scroll down here, I had to use more than one sheet. So if I click on any of the routing for this, it's just going to switch to that. If I click on any of the routing for this, it'll switch back. And a best practice thing that I like to do is, for just the movement speed efficiency of the machine, I like to go through, and you can scroll through your routings with this arrow key. I like to go through and have it so that the machine will route it in sort of a snaking pattern, so that it will go this part, 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 this part. And so again, you can just select these routings and move them up and down in the process with these arrow keys. So now that'll be sooner in the process. Once that's finished, and you've made the edits that you want to, you can go up and, just like an individual part file, save it as a project, and it's going to save it as an NSTX and a mix file. So let's do this. We'll create a folder called test. And I'll save it there. I'll call it test nest. And we'll save it. Takes a little second. While I'm here, also, as you can see, the names of the parts that you originally gave them in the piece parameters, they show up here. You can go up to options and toggle hide workpiece name. Toggle it back on. And this is good for when you want to take your parts off of the table and label them. So you can keep this open as a reference. But now, we'll go back here and we'll load our program that we just made. So I'll show you the full file path. Typically I save things on the desktop. And lately, we've mainly been working on the model, so I'll scroll down to the model folder right here. And I saved that in Closets V2, Bed 2A. Here it is, test. Now, we have our test nest. This is the first sheet. This is the second sheet. Again, it shows the parts required. But you can also simply load this mix file. And that will actually bring in both of the individual sheets. So if you click here, you can show the queue of your sheets. I've got sheet 1, and if I do it like this, I can run this sheet, and then as soon as it's done, the next sheet will be ready to go. And I can just slap a new sheet of plywood on there and have it start cutting. Now, these automatically lock once you load them as a mix file. So you can't edit anything about them. And you'll notice this is set to 0. But if I were to zoom in here, well, I'll zoom in on the actual this. Because we set those margins, here is the edge of the plywood and here is the edge of the piece. It automatically puts in an 1/8 inch margin already. So you don't need to worry about it. Now, an interesting little workaround that I've found is if you want to just edit something about just one of these sheets, you can load the same mix file again. And as you can see, these are unlocked. So I could go in and say I wanted to, you know, add another inch offset in the Y. Now the full offset in the Y direction would be 1 1/8 inches. So we can get rid of all these. And as you can see, as I delete things, the more present in the queue files, they get locked again. So you can do it as a mix file there, or you can go into the folder and do the individual sheets. And if you do it this way, now you can edit it initially as you bring it in. But if you know that you're not going to need any editing, it's probably better to load the nest file, the mix file, so that they're all just right there and you don't have to keep going back to the computer and finding the new files. And we have some basic things here. You can mirror the whole thing in the X or Y direction. You can rotate it around the Z-axis, or you can do repetitions. So if you know that you're just going to need 2 of all these parts, you do that, you run it, and it'll automatically just load the same thing again.